Hi everyone, this is Anton and you're on the Blackroom channel. Today we're going to talk about a topic called control systems in a home theater. What are control systems and why do we even need them? And basically, what problem do they solve? I'd like to start by outlining the problem. So, we've built this beautiful home theater together. By the way, just so you know, we're in the Tron Theater right now, and we've hidden the equipment far away, somewhere behind a wall. It's sitting there in a rack, not distracting us, not getting in the way, not heating up the room, and not making any noise here. But how do you control it? How do you switch between sources? How do you turn on your favorite movies? And by the way, how do you control your home theater, even if we're just talking about a regular living room? You probably have some kind of TV stand, and your equipment is set up there. That could be a receiver, maybe a few sources, maybe even an amplifier of some sort. How do you control all of that? Well, if you don't bother with anything special, you just use the regular, original remotes. How many of those do you end up with? In the end, you might have 5 or 6, sometimes even 10. And that gets really inconvenient. That's why people invented universal remote controls. It all starts with the simplest option. You get a single remote control, you program it, and it starts controlling all your devices according to the scenario you set up. An example of such a remote is, for instance, the Harmony remote. This remote is from my own home. I used it myself, probably for about 5 years. It's an excellent, reliable device that's very easy to configure right from your computer, and then it starts working via the infrared port. Like this or like this. Notice it has this. It has another sensor, another IR emitter, to control all your equipment. But you might ask me, what do you do if your equipment is behind closed doors? Very often, we want to have a clean look, the appearance of our equipment. When you can't see it, even though it's sitting inside your cabinet. The cabinet might be ventilated, but there's no direct access for infrared signals to reach the equipment anymore. In that case, you'll need to buy what's called a hub for this remote, for example. It connects to this remote, or if you have an app on your phone, you open the app and see the exact same interface as on this touchscreen, just on your phone. And this hub becomes a kind of intermediary that relays your infrared commands inside the cabinet. You place it in there, close the doors without worry, and it sends out the infrared signal, which bounces off the different surfaces inside the cabinet and controls your equipment. This is the simplest, most elegant, and affordable solution. This is exactly what I would probably recommend to most home theater enthusiasts who don't yet have a universal remote, because it's definitely more convenient and more practical. You come in, pick up one remote, and press a button. One button in the activation scenario, for example, Apple TV, and your TV turns on. Your Apple TV turns on, your receiver switches to the right input, and that's it. Everything starts working, everything comes to life, and all you did was press a single button. Moreover, this remote can control almost all of your home devices that have, in one way or another, infrared control. So, for example, air conditioners, little radios, basically anything you can think of. Anything that already has one, right? Any device that originally comes with a remote control can be configured through a program right on your computer, and you can upload a new scenario or a new device to it. You just select a specific device. And then, using either the same hard buttons or the soft buttons that appear on the touchscreen, you control your individual home devices. And there are quite a few manufacturers of these universal remotes. For example, the company Universal Remote Control 4 makes them, as well as some other brands. Right now on your screens, you can see an incomplete list of companies that make universal remote controls. However, when things get more complicated, like when you've built yourself a home theater, added lighting, and a whole bunch of other devices. For example, you've set up a projector somewhere far away, and you just can't reach everything with a regular remote. Plus, not all equipment supports such simple control methods. And sometimes you really do need to make things more complex, for example, to get feedback from your devices. Or to control everything from your favorite iPad, or from your phone. So you can fully customize the interface however you want, just the way you envision it. In fact, the design of this app can be anything you like, but we'll talk more about that a bit later. So, when things get more complicated, when we're talking about serious installations in home theaters, you really need to use a specialized controller. Again, operatu.ru. There are a whole bunch of global brands that make these. And right now, on your screen, you can see, again, probably, not a complete list of those. Companies that produce various types of control systems. These can be standalone controllers, plus an interface for an iPad or a phone. They can be controllers along with various types of remotes, and so on. All sorts of different accessories for them, various related gadgets, infrared sensors. In other words, a complete set of everything you need. I'll explain how all of this works in a moment. These are produced by a number of different brands. So today, we won't focus on any particular one. I'll show you what these controllers look like, using RTI and Control 4 controllers as examples. And I also have a global cache here. So, how is the typical basic multimedia control system organized? Basically, this whole system is a part of what's called a smart home. That is, even within just this room. Even if there's no smart home system in the rest of the house, we can still control all the systems here, including lighting, air conditioning, and of course, all the audio and video equipment, all through a single interface. This could be a wall panel, it could be an iPad, it could be your personal phone, or it could be a universal remote like this one. All devices and all commands are set up on one interface or another. So, what actually happens physically? You need to place it somewhere near your equipment, which could be in a server room, in a closed cabinet, or even spread out around the house. In other words, it could be located in several parts of the house. And you install a controller like this in one of those places, preferably as close as possible to your main equipment. For example, here I have one in my hands right now. This is a controller from Control 4. It has certain ports on the back here. Or let's take, for example, an RTI controller, the XP6S model, a modern processor. It has this decorative panel here, which can be removed. So, well, let's quickly go over what we see on the panels. On the front panel, we have a port for programming via the USB interface. There's a whole row of LED indicators that show you the status of each interface. And there are controls for adjusting the power of the transmitted infrared signal. And accordingly, all the connections are located on the back panel. That is, starting from 6 ports for connecting infrared blasters, as they're called. So, you take a little device like this. It's also sold separately. This is what's called an IR emitter. One end plugs into this processor. And the other end, you see, the wire is long. It unrolls and sticks on, like this one here. A special double-sided tape is used to stick it directly onto the front panel of the infrared signal receiver, for example, on your Oppo or Karaoke device. And once the whole system is programmed, it will send the infrared signal through this little eye and control that specific device. There are 6 of these connections here, accordingly. You can connect them separately. 6 of these little eyes. By the way, you can extend them using twisted pair cable. You can adjust the signal strength a bit here, and it will work even at a distance of up to 5 meters for you. Next, we have a whole set of connections through a Phoenix connector. These are things like relays, triggers, and these are 3 ports called sense. So, there are control ports. You can open or close relays. You can allow or block 12 volts to your trigger outputs. And you can connect a sensor here. For example, you enter the home theater, install a motion sensor, and plug it in, right here. And when it's triggered, a certain scenario will play out. For example, the lights could turn on, or maybe even the entire home theater, if you want. This device is smart, it has feedback. Of course, there's an Ethernet port here, so you connect it to your local network, assign it an IP address, and you can control a whole bunch of devices via the IP protocol. Not just infrared, but also IP protocol. And by the way, more and more. Devices are working reliably and supporting IP control. That's exactly what we try to do, because all of this is already a bit last century. But actually, the most reliable connection is RS-232 or a serial port. There are 3 of them here. They're also made using RJ45 sockets. And these come included in the package. There are 3 adapters for RJ45. And on the other side, we have our S232. You plug it into your device, for example, into a TrinF processor. And with a regular patch cord, you connect TrinF processor. It's our S232 port. And the device, the RTI control processor. And this is probably the most reliable way to guarantee control and receive feedback from your processor, TrinF, because there's nothing between them except a physical connection, a physical cable. So, let me send the signal back. Nikolai, you need to know what state TrinF processor it is in, whether it's on or off, and which source it's currently on. And basically, what volume level it's set to, so that right here on this interface I can have all these parameters always displayed automatically. When I adjust the volume, the scale, the numbers, and so on change. So this is very important, useful, and most importantly, informative for the user. And here there's also an expansion port so you can connect a series of several such controllers together. Of course, there's an external power supply, 12 volts. And what's really convenient and cool is that this device now integrates easily into your rack cabinet. The package includes these rack ears. You just screw them on both sides here and mount it together with the rest of your equipment. It only takes up one rack unit. Here in the Tron Cinema Hall, and actually, in most of our cinema halls, this kind of processor has become the de facto standard. The XP6S from RTI. And I'd like to share a funny story about control systems. It so happened that in the past, we always had certain programmers who specifically handled this area. In other words, they were responsible for programming this interface. They would install, configure, connect everything, and so on. At some point, I realized that this didn't work for me. The thing is, programmers always approached problem solving in their own way, and the interface and system logic they usually came up with, in my opinion, was extremely far from what would be clear and just intuitively understandable to the user. And I believe that a control system interface, just like a convenient, well-designed universal remote, should be intuitive. So at one point, when I got completely fed up with all of this, I just quickly dove into the system, learned how it's programmed and configured, how these interfaces are made, and immediately set up 2 rooms in a row. Basically, it wasn't all that difficult for me to do, because by profession, I'm a former IT director. Well, thank God I managed to do it, because now I set up the control system for every new room. In the past year alone, I've already done this for 6 or 7 rooms. And it literally takes me half a day. Everything starts working and moving, and basically, all that's left is to fine-tune the system with the user. But I'll talk about that a bit later. Because there are often situations when you think you've finished the interface, you've checked everything, and in your opinion, everything is fine. Everything turns on, off, switches as it should. Then the user comes in and actually starts using the cinema room. And sometimes scenarios come up that you just couldn't have anticipated. It's exactly this kind of feedback from the user that you need to collect later on and use to improve the control system, so that they don't happen again. So we started but didn't finish talking about how the control system is actually organized. Let's go back for a moment to our interfaces. So, the processor controls all the devices by sending certain control signals. These control signals, once again, are infrared signals. They're sent through these kinds of extenders and emitters. These are 12-volt trigger signals, meaning it can turn 12 volts on or off on 3 specific ports. This is actually the most reliable way to turn on TrinF processors, using triggers. That's because it's basically a regular computer, and sometimes it just goes into a deep sleep. And thank God, there are triggers on the control processor. There are also several power relay ports here. For example, in this room, we've set up a system to control the supply of fresh air using relays. As I mentioned in the previous video where we reviewed this Tron home theater, we set up the ventilation system so that by default, all the air goes to the pool. The pool is located across the hallway. And when we come here, either when we simply turn on the home theater system, or we can just press a single button. Supply air to the home theater. At that moment, the relay switches on and starts working. Several motors then open or close. Certain valves in the air supply system. And fresh air is supplied here, and accordingly, the exhaust system starts working at full power, specifically for this room. This process takes about 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, the relay turns off again according to the timer, and the motor calmly stops working, so it doesn't hit its limiter. The next control protocol and interface is RS-232. There are 3 separate ports here that you can use to connect various devices, including very old ones. You can connect devices that don't have any other interfaces at all. For example, in the 90s, a device might not have had an infrared port or a local network port. That's why RS-232 is most likely the interface that will work for old equipment. And of course, the most modern interface is the Ethernet interface for local network IP control. More and more devices are supporting IP control specifically. It's convenient. Basically, it's the same as the RS-232 port, just over IP. The same commands that are sent over RS-232 are layered on top of the IP protocol, and the device is controlled perfectly. But here, you need to be very attentive to your local network and demand the most reliable network from your local speakers. And always assign static addresses so that they don't change, ensuring your system works reliably. Now, let's briefly talk about how these control interfaces are actually created. The controller is installed in your rack, and you can create an interface like this on your laptop. Just now, I accidentally pressed air. The relays in the cinema hall turn on. You probably heard them. So, the control program looks roughly like what you see now in the screencast. This is a Windows application that you open, configure your specific processor, and add various hardware control panels to the system. By the way, RTI also has a whole range of universal control panels, some with screens, some without. So, there's a choice. And just recently, for example, we installed such a panel in the Shellgino project. You can see it in the pictures right now. I programmed it myself, too. And right now, we're finishing up the Berendiev Hall, where there will also be exactly the same panel and an interface for the iPad. It's going to be awesome, especially if you have at least some programming skills, because here you can write real control macros. Here you can see an example of such a macro, where you can set an if condition, add an else condition, and assign various commands to all these scenarios. For example, like I have it set up. This is implemented in this particular home theater. When I press the button to select a certain source, the following happens. RTI asks, "Is your audio-video processor turned on, my dear?" If it is on, then it takes the shortcut. That is, it switches the NID processor to another source, displays a temporary splash screen here so you can't press anything for a moment, and executes a certain set of commands. It carries them out. But this all happens quickly, within 5 to 6 seconds, and everything switches over for you, and you start watching that source. But if your NID processor is turned off, then RTI assumes that your entire home theater is shut down and powered off. And it follows this long scenario, where it turns on both the projector and the processor, then switches it to the right input, starts up the necessary source, turns on the ventilation in the theater, and so on and so forth. The same thing can be set up to happen when you press any button. So, this system is as flexible as your imagination and your deep understanding of this particular control system allow. The control panel is programmed in exactly the same way. In fact, the control panel is perfect for people who are more accustomed to tactile sensations when operating different things. For example, I really like them too. Physical remotes, and whenever possible, I always add them to a home theater as an extra, along with something like this iPad. By the way, it's pretty convenient if, for example, you use your iPad in other rooms, you take it with you, and then suddenly it's not in the home theater when you need it. You just grab the remote and have full control over the home theater with it. Or, on the other hand, if something happens to the remote, you can always take any iPad, basically, install the appropriate app, and your home theater configuration will automatically sync up. And you'll be able to control it just the same as with the original one that's mounted on the wall. Wait, but I want to use my iPhone. Nikolai, you can do it from your iPhone too. A separate interface is created for that. Right now, you can see on the screen what it looks like. Basically, you just need to do twice as much work programming and creating the interface. But it's not a problem. If you need it, it's totally doable. So let's sum it up. Basically, we take and configure this processor using the software you just saw on the screen. You upload this configuration first via the USB port, right here the first time. Sometimes you can do it right away over the IP protocol, but that's just a technical detail. And then you just sit here with your laptop and fine-tune the controls. And you upload new configurations, save, upload again, and check. This process is iterative like that until you finish debugging the system. But once it's debugged, it basically doesn't require any changes or intervention. Of course, sometimes unexpected things happen. For example, when Apple rolls out a new update, you go and update your iPad, and some things stop working, for example, not as reliably as they did just yesterday. But unfortunately, no one is immune to that. And yet it all works. In the end, as Steve Jobs used to say, it works like magic. You press certain buttons on your iPad, your phone, or your control panel, and everything works, everything changes. The lights go off, turn on, sources switch, movies start playing. If needed, you can make the air conditioning warmer or cooler, but for that you usually need another external unit, which has to be integrated with this system. So it's a whole world, just like our home theaters. This is basically a smart home, but within a single room, and that's what we do, so that when you come in here and sit down in your favorite chair, you don't have to get up anymore. So that, for example, you can just turn off the lights, make the steps brighter, switch sources, start your favorite movie, turn on the air conditioning, or add some fresh air. Anything you want can be connected here, even the chairs. Some companies that make chairs even have ready-made controllers. Do you integrate them? So in this system, when you leave and, for example, completely shut down the home theater, a scenario is triggered where all the chairs return to their original position. Right now in the video, you can see how this works, what it looks like. You can now see this particular control interface for the home theater on your screen. There's a whole set of pages here that control individual sources. There are pages for lighting control. You can increase or decrease the intensity of any lighting group. You can activate any lighting scenario with the press of a single button. And you can go straight to the RGB lighting controls and tweak individual settings, adjusting the color of each of the 5 DMX channels separately. These are the LED lighting groups in this complex home theater. Now, friends, there's one more little thing I wanted to tell you about. There's a scenario where you find a device that you have absolutely no way to access. It can't be controlled, you have no documentation for it, nothing at all, and you have no idea how to control it, but it does have its original remote and an infrared port for receiving signals. So, it can be controlled with the remote. For these situations, there's this great IR code reader that connects to your computer. You point your old remote from the device you want to control at it. And on the computer, a library of infrared codes is created, which can then be uploaded here and easily added to this interface. And you'll be able to control any device for which, thankfully, you still have the remote. Friends, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative. If so, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And in the comments, let's talk about what kind of control system you use in your home theater or cinema room. Do you have something like this? And do you use a tablet or a universal remote? Or are you still old school and use 6 or 10 different old remotes? Let us know in the comments. This was Anton and the Blackroom team. Subscribe to our channel, where we tell the whole unvarnished truth about real home theaters. See you